Okay. Um, I'm going to go fairly quickly on this because I've been going to the Amazon for an awfully long time. So I have an awfully large number of photos, and I keep going back there and the photos keep accumulating. And so I'm going to give a little history of me, and then I'm going to show you what most of the boats look like on the big river, the Amazon itself, and then what they look like in the jungles around the Amazon. So let's see if this thing will advance. Ah, good, but that's not the one I want. So I've done a lot of work down there. I started working on the Amazon in 1976, which if I calculate correctly is something like 46 years ago. I started on the Orinoco River in 81, and then Panama in 84 with various projects that kept growing, Puerto Rico in 90, and I've also worked a bit in Borneo and Kenya. And then one of the big things I've been doing, which I'll describe somewhat here, is working with the Rapid Inventory Program at the Chicago Field Museum. And that started in 2004. And I am kind of a water and mud nut. So this cartoon does really capture me pretty well. And here's a sort of a geologic map of the Amazon. I don't know, was Lynn on here? She likes doing Grand Canyon geology. Well, this is geology of all of Northern South America in one quick bango. So, by the way, I'm a biogeochemist, in case you don't know. So anyways, to the west is all the young stuff, the Andes, volcanoes, a bit of island arc attached to Western South America in the form of the Isthmus of Panama. To the east of the Andes is a big trough, which is pushed down by the mountains going up. And then to the east of that are two huge pieces of Precambrian shield, sort of like northern Canada. And between these two pieces of shield is another trough, the Amazon trough, which probably started forming when the Atlantic Ocean rifted open. So the Amazon really drains much of this map that I'm showing you here. I'm sort of circling the basin. It's this fine dotted line. That's the Amazon. And then the Orinoco is to the north. And it looks a lot smaller, but the Amazon is world's largest river by far. It's 20% of all the world's river water that enters the ocean. And the Orinoco is actually number 3. And the middle river between the two is the Zaire. So I've worked on the number 1 and the number 3 rivers quite a lot. I started work in '76 on the Alpha Helix, which is run by the National Science Foundation and was designed for coral reefs, but it got waylaid for a trip all the way up the Amazon, mostly to do biology, but we did biogeochemistry going in and going out. And that's me. That's Mickey laughing. That's me at the age of 25, 24, 25.
That's awesome, Bob.
I was young once. We not only worked on that boat, the Alpha Helix, this is a lab on the Alpha Helix. I also started sampling using public transportation, whatever it might have been. And this is the Ucayali River in Peru, which is probably about a class 3 river. And this boat traverses the Ucayali. It starts upriver, loaded full of things like concrete and things like that. It unloads in the town of Yurimaguas and then proceeded back up the river empty. Notice it had 3 outboard motors to propel it. I also wandered around South America collecting and processing samples. There I am maybe a year later. Again, I'm having laughter to my left. And then in the early 80s, I started working on the Orinoco River, and that used a converted motorized barge called the Duida. And this is what the Duida looked like. And we went up and down the Orinoco River. So I've been up and down the Amazon 3 times, the Orinoco quite a bit more than that, and I've lost count. And basically we use this barge as a floating lab and process samples. On board, we could carry our field sampling boat with us. This is all funded by the Venezuelan government at that time, when there was a lot of money there. This is what the deck looked like. I love the storms in the Amazon. And I had a floating lab here. This is now about 30 or so. Filtered samples and the like. Shortly after that, I got involved with much more sort of sophisticated work in Venezuela. This was actually in the 90s. And we switched from boats to helicopters because, again, this was being sponsored by the Venezuelan government. And what we were doing is chasing down the effects of renegade gold mining. And this is a picture of a gold mining barge from the air. The problem is to separate the gold from the sediment that was going through these sluice boxes. They were using mercury, and a fair amount of that mercury ends up in the environment, contaminating water and fish, and makes a mess of things. And so we were monitoring where the mercury was going. And we did learn that an awful lot of mercury was entering the food chain, much more than would happen here in temperate world. And one of the people involved even ended up getting severe mercury poisoning from a fish dinner. This is what a big gold mining operation looks like from the air. They use hydraulic mining to just burrow down in the soil, mix the sediment or the soil here in the case of this landscape, mix it with mercury. They separate out the mercury, and then it is often distilled, and the mercury vapor is distilled into the open air. This is from 95. I was involved in a conference. You know, I speak Spanish, so I ended up being the sort of the face of the conference for the newspaper. And I did not create the headline, you know, the mutation haunts the rivers of Guyana. That's the part of the Orinoco Basin that I was in. And here's a typical gold and diamond buying operation, you know, where I was. And so I went and chatted with these miners. And this is what the gold they bring in looks like. It's these big flat flakes. And that is because they take the mercury that they have harvested from their sluice boxes or whatever, and they distill that mercury in a shovel blade. And so the mercury goes into the atmosphere, and what remains on the shovel blade is gold. And this is some of the gold from the shovel blade. And we set up portable labs. These are actually quite good labs for trace element studies. We were doing mercury, and this is set up in a hotel room in Canaima. And this is our group standing in front of Angel Falls in Venezuela. We actually sampled this river coming. It's the tallest waterfall in the world. It's more than a kilometer high, but it came from a landscape where we were sure there was no gold mining. And so this would represent good background mercury. So we sampled the streams coming off of Angel Falls. Now we get more into boats. This is me with my model Amazon riverboat. It's sort of a little miniature. It doesn't have as many decks as the usual boat, but you'll see this repeated over and over again. The decks are curved like this, upper and lower deck. Sort of helps the rain run off. I think it also helps with the dynamics of the boat. And this part below the top deck, sometimes there's two decks, is typically filled with hammock racks. And you go get a ticket for your boat, you have your hammock. Sometimes you have to buy a hammock hanging cord to hang on the rack. And that's where you sleep as you travel up and down the river. And here's a boat. I actually traveled in this boat. And so the hammock area here is this big area underneath, and there's a smaller hammock area up top, better breeze. And you can see the hammocks hanging in it. You note that there's a satellite antenna, so you get the good soccer games on these boats. And this little sign here says leaves today. So that boat was going, probably these beer bottles had been offloaded or unloaded, I'm not sure which. And this one was going upriver since I was on it. I know that where it was going. And all the way at time when you travel the Amazon, and by the way, the Amazon in this part, this is the lower Amazon, it's so wide that if you are on one bank, you oftentimes cannot see the other bank at all. It's over the horizon. And so as you go up the river, you find towns, and the towns often have several little, basically boat stations, like bus stations, where people get on and off the boats. Here's another boat on the river. Again, you see the curved hull design. This boat is going around selling ice, again, but the similar curved hull design. And here's a rather handsome looking riverboat. And you can't see through from one side to the other on the deck because it's all filled with hammocks. In fact, this boat's really filled with a lot of people.
Hey, Bob,
Also,
if there's a question, do you want to wait till the end, or do you want to answer those now?
I can answer. I see a chat. There's one thing.
Yeah.
It says, can those gold mining areas be cleaned up? That's a long story, but I think they can. You need a lot of will on all parts. So you also see river barges on the river. And
Bob, could I ask one question about the gold mines also?
yeah,
I was just curious, is that stuff still going on? Is there still mining that's going on with mercury, or is that back in the
totally.
90s? Oh, okay.
No, it's going on crazy right now.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And gosh, with things like war really encourages gold mining.
Okay.
So why is this not advancing? Well, Mickey asked me to tell how dangerous I think mercury is. And to me, mercury is much like radioactivity. Once it gets into the environment, it almost never leaves. And it takes on various forms, all of which are toxic. The worst being methyl mercury, which is the one that gets in the food train, which is the one that poisoned one of our researchers from his fish dinner. It's one of these things where there's no such thing as a safe amount in the environment. Yeah.
Are they still using mercury in their current methods of gold mining?
Oh, totally.
Ugh.
Because mercury has a specific gravity of 15. Gold has a specific gravity of 19, pretty similar. And the mercury can go in by the same trade routes that the gold goes out. So it's easy to smuggle and incredibly bad.
Yeah, wow.
So here's another boat. And this is getting to be in the port of Manaus. And you can see that there's a big ocean-going vessel behind, because until you get up 3,000 kilometers, 2,000 something miles up the Amazon River, ocean-going vessels have no problem navigating the river. It's, 100 feet deep. And then there's a lot of the little small river boats here too. This is way up the Amazon. Just before you leave Brazil and go into Peru, Sao Paulo de Olivencia. This is just the port. And then this is sort of a zoom in on that rather handsome looking riverboat, again, full of people. Now there's a new boat on the Amazon River, and this is one of them. It's called the Ajato 2000, and it's powered also by 3 big, very big outboard motors. It can cover distances in one day that it takes the other boats 3 or 4 days to cover, less than a day. And it's sort of set up like an airplane. This is the same boat out on the water. And inside you have airplane seats. That's my friend Bob Mead. And you get served meals by a steward or some sort of person. Forget what you'd call that person on a boat. But anyways, they serve meals, and the meals are rather nice, almost always chicken. Really comfortable way to travel on the river. I took my mother on a cruise on a tourist boat. This one sank near the Antarctic a number of years ago when it hit some bad ice. But here it is on the Amazon. And this is a great look at an Amazon sky. Just these storms bear down on you like a dust speck with a vacuum cleaner. Now, as you go up the river, all along you see people living. And here is a guy with a doncella. It's one of the large catfish. Edible. It's actually very tasty. And then you see one of his little canoes behind with a nice paddle. And I'll show you some more paddles in a second. And some of the water areas have the giant Amazon water lily. This one is about 6 feet across. Those are my shoes. These are absolutely gorgeous plants. And they form these colonies in quiet waters alongside the Amazon River. Oh yeah, the flowers open so rapidly that in one evening you can see a flower go from a bud to a fully open flower. And then over the next day they change color from white to pink, and then they sort of close in on themselves and go to seed. So this is the Field Museum in Chicago, not very far from here. And in 2004, I joined their rapid inventory program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this because it's given me an incredible amount of opportunity to see parts of the Amazon that nobody sees. I showed a tourist boat, the Discovery, in the last set of slides. That's because it can go on these types of, on the main Amazon main channel. But if you're going to go remote, you need to go with a museum. And they have a program, Environment, Culture, and Conservation, which began in 1995 with a bunch of scientists, but it also includes sociologists. And they were figuring out a way of using science and sociology to preserve landscape. And they've worked mostly in Peru. They've also been to China, Cuba, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Colombia. And every time we do an inventory, a book is published for that inventory, and that's a pile of them on the right. And the publication is in multiple languages. So there's a section in Spanish, a section in English that's the same as the Spanish section, appendices, and then summaries in all of the indigenous languages of the area in which we were doing the inventory. And those books are written in 1 week, following an inventory, which lasts about 4 to 5 weeks. We spend a bunch of time in the field, like 3 or 4 weeks, a week writing it up and discussing the results. And then everybody goes home and show you that process. But return on the investment has been enormous. It costs $300,000 to $500,000 to run an inventory. This is all private funding raised from foundations and donors and stuff like that. And the Field Museum estimates that for each dollar spent, they preserve 2 hectares, which is a little bit more than 4 acres. And I started in 2004. I've been involved in 11 of these inventories, for which at least 3.5 million hectares have been protected. That's 4 times the area of Yellowstone National Park. And every inventory has a huge buy-in from agencies. I mean, we have universities, we have NGOs, we have tribes, we have tribal federations, and so forth. And some of these are on this slide. Before the inventory, a group goes out and sort of surveys for possible sites. Most of these are Field Museum people with some local expertise. Agreements are prepared with the tribes for, working on their territory. As you can see, there's an awful lot of signatures that go into this. Then the sociologist and the biologist and me rendezvous in a city, usually Iquitos. This is Iquitos right here. And we spend a day or 2 organizing to go into the field. We spend 3 to 4 weeks in the field, and then we come back. So this is our bus going to the heliport. We usually take a helicopter ride into our field site. The site itself has been cut out of the jungle over the previous 2 weeks. A system of trails have been laid out. A helicopter landing area has been cut out of the forest, and we set to it in each of these sites. And then the helicopter comes back, or we take a boat to the next site. And this goes, as I said, for 3 or 4 sites. And this is what the field camp looks like. The tables are made from felled trees. Sometimes we have a thatch roof. Usually we have a plastic roof. I mean, it really rains here, it dumps. So it's important to have a roof, and everybody has a place at these long tables, and we just work on whatever we've collected. I collect water samples and mud and things like that. I drink iced tea. That's what that dark colored liquid is in the front. Meanwhile, the sociology team is going around and talking to people in the surrounding area, trying to judge whether they are really interested in conserving the site that the biologists are looking at. Then we all come back, and you can see how mercilessly hot it is. If you look under the blades of the helicopter, you find that everybody's lined up in the shade of the helicopter blade. Not everybody, but a lot of people are. That's me in the foreground. When we land, we give a talk, as you see, with bed sheets and portable overhead projectors to the local groups that we're hoping to engage in conservation. Frequently, people come from all around to attend these talks. Then we go back to Iquitos, we do our write-up, and then we do a grand talk, usually at some reasonably large auditorium. In Iquitos, this was at the Vicariate in Iquitos, which it's sort of Iquitos, Peru. It's rather odd, but for that week, we are literally cloistered writing. Sometimes we're cloistered in a hotel, but sometimes we're cloistered in a cloister. Then after we do the writing, we hand over the rough draft of the final report to the guy in the middle here, Alvaro Campo. And he also supervises our exit from wherever we are. And we fly off and go home. And then after a while, we receive copies of our rough drafts back for editing and cleaning up. And we do the cleanup and it goes back to the Field Museum and the report gets created. I do geology, hydrology, and soils. This is just from one inventory. You know, our presentations are in Spanish, so these slides have, most of their captions are in Spanish. This is inventory 28 with Carolina Londoño, who's now married and teaching school and in the Phoenix area. She's Colombian. This is my field instruments, maps based on satellite, GPS, and a pH conductivity meter. And we're walking day after day through this sort of landscape, trees and forest and whatever, occasionally streams. And we're working with a lot with the indigenous population. And so I'm going to show some pictures of the dudes we work with before I get back into boats. This is a salt deposit here. These are really important culturally. They use two salts, the gypsum and rock salt. Gypsum they call dead salt, but they heat it up and dry it out and make it into plaster of Paris, which they use, the women use for making yarn. And the rock salt is used for preserving fish and people eating. They do weavings there. And here are some appropriately decorated people. This is their village. This is another village on the Putumayo River to show what it looks like during flooding. Everything there is built to accommodate flooding. So the houses and the buildings float and there are walkways between them, but you can also access by boat. And when the river's down, you walk on the floodplain. And here are some of the little boats that people use. These are kids laying a fishing net. Here's a little boy paddling a tiny canoe. And by the way, they go forward from this end too, forward and backwards. Here's some more people paddling canoes, but you notice there's two shapes of paddles there. You'll see those two shapes in a second. And it's a lot of person for a small amount of canoe. And this is a very typical sight. I would have trouble balancing this boat, but these guys do not. So here's a town on the Galvez River, and there's a paddle sticking in the soil. And this is what a typical river town looks like. These are Matses here. Matses are a tribe, and we were helping them with identifying the traditional boundaries of their territory because they wanted to expand it. And here is an Boulder indigenous woman, and she has 3 paddles with her. The one on the left here, her right, was purchased in the market at Manaus. The middle one was purchased in the market at Santarém, which is farther down the Amazon. It's actually the tides make it to Santarém. And the third one, the one on the right, her left, is from the Orinoco River Delta. And it has a black color because it had been soaked in oil, probably as a preservative. Here's a close look at the blades. Quite different. And the handles. Again, quite different. Notice the middle one is actually asymmetrical. When you see a raft, this is a raft. It's not some inflatable thing that people are going down river with. usually a big pile of logs roped together, sometimes to ship the logs downriver or sometimes to carry something on top of the logs downriver. But rafts are built upstream and they are moved downstream. And oftentimes they're nudged around with a power boat, sometimes with a paddle boat. And then here's a very special type of boat. It's called a peke peke. And you see there's a motor with a long shaft going out of that. Here's another view of it with a motor and the shaft is raised here. And the peke peke is designed for traveling up and down rivers that are filled with woody debris, something that we rafters and canoeists are terrified of. But on these rivers, the peke peke operator is not terrified. So the peke peke has a hull design where if you see a small log or branches in the river, you aim right at it and you hit it perpendicularly. And the motor with its long shaft gives you propulsion as your boat rides up and over the obstacle. And so you just are going up and over until the obstacle gets too big. And then you get out your motor saw and you cut the obstacle down. And so here's some other river boats. On the right, we have a peke peke with the propeller brought in. You can see how long it is. And it's got incredible flexibility and it has a full 360 degrees of motion and an enormous amount of tilt just for running over the logs. And then next to it is a river boat for going down rivers that don't have many logs. It has some. You can get out your chainsaw and cut those logs too. But we were transferring in this image from the peke peke to the larger boat. Here's another look at one of these larger boats. Many times they have a dugout keel, and then the boards are built up off the keel. And then when you get down to the bigger rivers, you get to fancier boats made out of metal. And this is the Rio Algolon, and the Rio Putumayo. It's just the names of two boats. They're, I've traveled in both of these. It's really fun. It's nice having the protection from the rain. And the big old boats, like the ones you saw before, if they die, they get a new life as a place of residence for people. Here's some more pictures, people fishing, people carrying stuff, cute little kids. And I assume that people might want to see some animals in addition to boats. So we have a collared peccary on the top right, on the top left, little baby peccaries on the top right, a tamandua, which is Mickey's spirit animal, on the bottom left, and a tyra, which is in the weasel family, on the bottom right. Here's monkeys up high. There's a tapir on the bottom left, and more monkeys to the right. The woolly monkey is the one on the top there. And one of the fun things about woolly monkeys is they can tell you whether or not you're the first person to visit a piece of forest or one of the first, because if the woolly monkeys come out of the tree and are angry at you and throwing things, that means people haven't been there before. And they're just treating you as another nasty monkey that they want to get rid of. But people come with guns and bows and arrows and blowguns. And these woolly monkeys learn very quickly that people are especially dangerous. So if you see a bunch of woolly monkeys and they flee, that's almost immediate information that you're not the first. And then there are wild dogs of types that you've never seen in the Amazon. And the one on the lower right actually eats fruit. And the river has some cool mammals too. One is the giant river otter. And these things are enormous. They're, sort of the size of a mountain lion or something like that. They're huge. And then the Amazon River has two types of river dolphins. One is a gray looking normal river dolphin, and the other is a gray to pink river dolphin that's decidedly unusual looking. And here's what one of those looks when it's jumping. And then there are a lot of fish there. And so I'm just going to go through a bunch of fish, show you some dangerous ones too, ones that you have to be careful of, like the electric eel. This can actually kill you in the Amazon. It gives you a nice good shock. You get knocked unconscious and then you drown. There's another fish. This is the Donsea again, like the one we saw earlier. The tucunare is the peacock bass, which is a game fish. It's actually considered kind of low on the delicious fish chain in the Amazon. And some of the really great fish, like the tambaqui, eat nuts when the forest is flooded. And so they have a flesh that tastes nutty, and it's quite delicious. All of these are fish that you eat. And then there's very dangerous fish, and these are stingrays. These are all from one area on the lower Putumayo River. You just don't want to step on one of these. Spine goes into the foot, and you're incapacitated. And that's how big a large one can be. One of the most sought after sort of aquarium fish is the arowana. It's sought after by the Japanese for some reason. And so whole communities collect the young hatchlings, and they are shipped to Japan to be raised as aquarium fish. And then one of the big eating fish is the paiche, or piroruku is another name for it. These are also quite delicious. The scales are used for nail files and various other things. But look at the size of that guy. Here's something in the salmon family with Iquitos salmon. And I don't know what this is, but. And then we keep finding new species, and some of these are weird looking stuff. And then we also find a lot of ornamental fish. Some of them are really tiny too. And here's what the rivers look like from the air. I mean, it's in much of the Amazon, it's just jungle. And there's good view from the river, a lake in the middle of the jungle, another lake in the middle of the jungle. That's probably the Putumayo River, tributary to the Putumayo. Some small squiggly river. Here the water is low. You can see a lot of mud in the bed. Here the water in this river is high. No mud visible. This is a swampland with one particular type of palm, the moriche palm. More swamp. Here's our boat. This is taken not from an airplane or a helicopter. It was taken from a drone, not one of our drones. And this is a stream tributary to the Algodón. More swamp. Here's a peatland in Peru. If you looked at the New York Times article on peats 2 weeks ago, they mentioned the Peruvian peats. This is one of them. Some of the streams are beautiful, gravel-filled streams. There's a landscape with peats and trees, more rivers. Occasionally you see glorious things like these 4 macaws in flight over some fallen woody debris. I think that's Peru in the foreground, Colombia in the background. More twisty rivers. Putumayo once again. This is a small, sustainable timber operation, which is being set up as a model. This is its view of it from air. Here's the river by it. More rivers. Oh, our jungle camps also have a quality like this. We can swim in the river for bathing, and we cross a lot of the rivers on logs, log bridges. It's a typical jungle stream. The water is probably as pure as distilled water that you would get out of King Soopers. It doesn't look like it'd be that pure, but it is. It's got nothing dissolved in it. Another beautiful jungle stream. One of the things that we have in this part of the Amazon is called root mat. It's about 4 to 8 inches thick. It's a characteristic of super poor soils, and this is just a picture of root mat. And root mat is often associated with these black water streams in which the water is just dyed with tannins. We also get to work in mountainous areas. I'll just show a few. These are geologically similar to Boulder or the Front Range, lots of tilted beds of hard sandstone, like the Flatirons. One of the first ranges of the Rockies. Anyways, Amazon, of course, is being menaced by many things. And if you looked at the New York Times 2 days ago, they commented the Amazon may be nearing a tipping point where deforestation will lead to irreversible formation of savanna. But here's what deforestation looks like from the air, from the ground. They are absolute masters of the chainsaw. They can make boards to set dimensions all by hand just with a chainsaw. Nice tables. This is what an oil operation looks like. It's the problem with oil operations is there's a lot of wastewater, and wastewater ponds and things overflow and get into the rivers and contaminate. Basically, they're a mess, and a lot of the indigenous populations and other local populations don't like them. So and they ruin the environment. So there's ongoing wars between oil and anti-oil. Here's what they look like from the river. Then there's gold, back to gold. This is a total, and the term that's used is artisan gold. I prefer to use renegade gold. I see nothing artisan in releasing mercury into the environment, but these people do look nice, and they're trying to make a living out of getting gold out of these rivers. But this is what the river ends up looking like. And it looks ugly, and there's also a lot of gold, mercury in the river. Some of the mining operations are based off of barges, like the one I showed much earlier in this talk. Here's a big gold barge up against the coast in Colombia. Anyways, I have worked a lot in trying to clean up the environment in the Amazon so that it all looks gorgeous, like this picture from the lower Yaguas River at sunset. And I hope it stays that way. And I actually hope some of the people on this Zoom get a chance to see the Amazon and maybe get away from the main tourist areas and get into deep jungle. This particular spot is in the most downstream end of Yaguas National Park, which is it's basically 97% or 96% of the size of Yellowstone. It's a beautiful place, and it's probably one of the places that will eventually be accessible to intrepid people who might even be able to boat up the river to get to it. I don't know. So that's it. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
That was great, Bob. Yeah, we do have a few questions in the chat here. It looks like Jim Zimmerman was asking, what response do you get from the tribes?
There's a dynamic range. Most of the times it's extraordinarily enthusiastic because the tribes have asked us to come in. We had one very bad experience where we were held hostage by 22 people carrying 21 shotguns. And that appears to have been a failure by our sociology team to negotiate with the most distant settlement in the region and get a signed agreement. So it was bad, but otherwise.
How disparate are the tribes? Are there hundreds or thousands or?
Oh, there's a huge number of tribes. I'd say hundreds. They all speak different languages. They have very different cultures and societies. That's all I can say. I mean, the people who I've met and interacted with are just quite marvelous. They know a lot about where they live, as they should, because that's how they survive. Many of them are trying to adapt to maintain their cultural existence and still interact with the European culture of the rest of, let's say, Peru or Colombia. And some of them are very successful at that. Probably the most successful I know is the Matses, who when I went and saw them, had 35 years of contact. But during that 35 years, they had set up a program much like the Pennsylvania Dutch do, where the teenagers can go and do whatever they want, anywhere in Peru. In fact, they even do it with funding from the Matses. And so they try to get kids to go to school, learn to be lawyers and teachers and whatever, and they do. And many of them just come back to live back in Matses territory, which is would be considered quite primitive by us. But the ones that are trained as lawyers actually are working to prevent the logging and the gold mining in their territory, and they're being successful. So I would say by and large, we have actually, I would say, incredible relations with the local tribes. And in fact, many come to our final presentation in Iquitos or Leticia, Colombia, or other towns, and they show up, they give testimony of what they feel about the inventories, and we've even had them show up in Lima when we've given presentations to the Ministry of the Environment, again in support. So I'd say we are strongly supported.
Nice. There's another question. Says, are the indigenous people experiencing a lot of mercury poisoning?
That we do not know. We suspect it is. We know that sort of the Ribereño type people who are not indigenous, but of European and indigenous ancestry living along the rivers, they do show mercury poisoning. In fact, we had one as a guide. He was totally loopy, but really happy and friendly. It was like mad as a hatter. Yeah, they are.
Oh, that's scary.
What is an ornamental fish? Does that mean non-native? Or an ornamental fish is a very pretty decorative fish, and these are what you see being sold in tropical fish stores. Many of them are from the Amazon. They are collected down in the Amazon, put in aquaria, and brought hither and yon to be sold as ornamental fish. And it's a big industry, and some ornamental fish industry is sustainable. And they're trying to make the arowana industry sustainable, in particular with arowana farming, because there's so many going to Japan.
Are the arowanas the ones that get to the surface and they kind of like spit and they hit the bug and the bug?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really pretty fish.
They're quite cool.
Yeah. All right.
I saw one of the arowanas at the what was it, when I went to Denver Zoo Lights, and like it went into like this one room where they had all these aquariums, and the arowana was like spitting water. I figured it was trying to communicate with me.
Yeah, I have a
I
friend
mean,
that has
obviously that's what it was trying to do.
I have a friend that has a now obsolete legalized arowana t-shirt.
No, really. Nice.
Nice. Are there any other questions for Bob?
Bob, did you
I got
ever,
something for you.
go ahead.
Do I ever what?
Go ahead, Jim, go for it.
Okay, those otters sound huge. Did you ever actually run into any of those giant otters, river otters?
Well, I have not. I have seen them in action. They are fully capable of controlling the environment around themselves, and I would never get close to them, but I've actually seen them both in the Amazon and in Panama, and they are huge. They're unbelievably large.
Are they, I mean, you know, everybody thinks of otters as these cute, playful things. Are they aggressive?
Oh, they can be aggressive, and of course, very aggressive to their prey. But the local fishermen feel that they are competing with the otters for fish, which may be true, but the otters were there first. But there is a bit of problems with people shooting river otters to get rid of them.
Oh,
And,
wow.
so
They're not like trying to hunt them. They're just nuisance animals, I think.
they're considered nuisance, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And that's one of the things that, I mean, studies have been done. The river otters do not siphon off that much of the fish catch. And, you know, as part of the sociological team's activities, they try to educate people about things like river otters. You know, make sure the knowledge is not a one-way street.
Mm-hmm.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, Bob, thanks so much for this. I got a question. Since you've been on the Amazon and the Orinoco, what's the water clarity difference between the two, if any? As are they both just really, is that turbid? Is that the right
They're
word?
both pretty turbid, yeah. In the Amazon vernacular, they are whitewater rivers, and they are white because of the suspended sediment, which is there pretty much all the time. Some of the Amazon tributaries are called clearwater rivers because they are really quite clear with no turbidity. And then there are the blackwater rivers, and I showed one picture of blackwater in there, or maybe two. But those are really dark as tea sometimes. And they're fun to swim down underneath the water because it gets dark very quickly as you go down.
It's encouraged to swim in these rivers, I would think. I got another one for you. It seemed like on one of the pictures of the smaller boats, there was like a gas-powered trash pump, like a bilge pump, but you know, in the bottom of a open wooden boat. Is that from rain
Some
or
of
just a
those-
leaky boat?
some of those could have been for pumping out the leaky boats. Sometimes they're for pumping water in. I don't know.
Okay.
But I suspect it was for pumping water out.
Again, another one of those things that takes some courage to explore the areas. I got my last one that I wrote down. Is you seem like you're a big fan of like the swooped decks, the multi-layered decks of the Amazon river boats. And is that do you see that design anywhere else, or is that just a function of the aesthetics over time that they came up with that?
No, I've seen that design in Massachusetts and the Portuguese fishing boats. So Brazil it has Portuguese influence, and so does these towns in Massachusetts. So I suspect it's a Portuguese design in the end. But it is definitely good for getting rid of rain on a deck.
Are there any rapids on the Amazon that?
On the Amazon itself, there are no rapids. That's why it's navigable so far up. But all of the tributaries have a set of rapids that, a fall line. And the Orinoco River used to have rapids, but not exactly rapids, but an area of incredibly turbulent water called El Infierno, the hell. And I went through El Infierno with that big giant boat when it was still El Infierno, and the boat was twisting around, and there were whirlpools and all that. And then the Venezuelan government went in with dynamite and all that, and it's gone.
Wow. Those river boats look so top heavy, and I just wonder how they do in turbulence or, funky currents or whatever.
They might do, they can handle some pretty windy storms. So I don't know how susceptible they would be, but there aren't very many currents of the sort that you would consider rapids, except for El Infierno, which clearly they blew it up because some people were having problems with it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't recreational problems.
Yeah. Wow. So after all you showed us, you still swim in that? All those creatures?
Well, you have not much choice. I mean, if you're out in the field for 3 to 4 weeks and you want to be clean, you got to wade in. I do. But I wear Crocs. I figured the stingray spines might be somewhat impeded by the Crocs.
I thought you were saying that scared them off, having those 2 Crocs there.
I don't think so. And then the electric eel, that's a little bit scary, but I bathe in areas where the fish people, the ichthyologists, say there shouldn't be any electric eels there. They seem to like certain types of territory.
So
But one group of fish people was working on a river, and all of a sudden one of the people working the nets just went under and never came up, and they thought that was an electric eel.
Oh my gosh.
And those can take down like a horse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
And then one of our fish people, one of the main ones actually, I didn't put his picture up. He was killed on one of the rivers in Venezuela in a rapids. I still don't know the details, but I suspect it was woody debris.
What do you mean by woody debris? You mean did he
These
die?
gigantic trees and logs and everything that you find all over the place on these rivers. It probably held them under.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, they capsized.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right.
And his body floated up like 100 miles downstream.
Oh, wow.
So a river like the Amazon, the flow in the middle of the river, let's see, I'm thinking in meters, it's 10 meters a second. That's 30 feet a second. A river hustling like that, like the Colorado, would be considered absolutely terrifying. But the Amazon is so big that by the time you get out to the middle, it's just this jet of flat, fast-moving water. So I was involved once in measuring the flow of the Amazon on a particularly wet year. It's 1976, July. And we measured a flow of over 1 million cubic meters per second. And I think that's about 30 million cubic feet per second.
Oh, wow.
You compare that to any of the discharge measurements that you see on stream gauges in the United States. It's huge. Like for the Amazon tributaries, the two big ones that come together in Peru are larger than the Mississippi. So that's 2 Mississippis. And then you keep adding Mississippis on either side. And by the time you get down to the lower Amazon, it's about 10 Mississippis. I mean, it's just huge.
Wow.
It's hard to comprehend.
Are there other minerals like, I don't know, silver or other things like that that they mine for as well?
There's diamonds and gold,
Like
and
that?
of course, petroleum. But there are places that have amazing diamond potential. And in the history of that region, there have been a few awesome droughts. And in Venezuela, where the rivers have a rocky bed, during those huge droughts, you go out into the cracks in the rocky bed that are normally deeply submerged, and you can find gold nuggets and diamonds. In case you want an activity.
So when's the next drought?
So anyway, yeah.
So how tourist friendly is that area? I mean, not that I'm going to go down there next week, but if
The
anybody
big
has plans
cities are really tourist friendly. Like Iquitos in Peru, you can go to eco lodges or take eco cruises, some of which, are run rather well, get you out into the jungle, into the animals and stuff like that. And I'd say these towns make a fair amount of money off of tourism. So you try to be friendly to the people who are bringing the money in. Iquitos is one of the strangest towns I've ever been to, though.
How so?
Well, it's only accessible by water or by air. And so, as time goes on, you see more and more like signs like we have in our cities, but Iquitos, everything is hand painted. So hand painted signs, murals all over the place. There's boat builders, so the buses are basically boat building on a truck body. And there you have a bus with boat-like windows and it's also highly separated from the Catholic morality of the rest of Peru. And so it's a huge area of cross-dressing and things like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of character.
There's a lot of character in Iquitos, yes.
That sounds neat.
And
And
what
of
month
course,
was
the ayahuasca tourism is huge right now.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
what months were your field seasons down there?
We tend to go in the, I would say, October through February. But I've been down there all months. Some are really wet.
So October through February, that's their summer months though, right?
Well, it depends. I mean, the equator, Peru is just south of the equator. So Colombia, equator goes through Colombia. I mean, the big ships, the cruise ships and stuff go upriver in roughly June, July. That's because that's the end of the wet season for most of the Amazon. As soon as the rain turns off, the river starts dropping. So boats have their maximum water, even though parts of the Amazon may be cranking up into the wet season at that time because, you know, it crosses the equator. It's on average, it's the driest. It's the beginning of the dry season.
So you say these ocean-going ships can go 2,000 miles up the Amazon?
Yeah.
So how far up does the brackish water go? Where does it go from salt to freshwater?
It actually doesn't. Tides get up to Santarém, which is 600 kilometers upriver, but the Amazon has such a flow that it pushes all the salt water out to sea. So, you know, when it was first discovered, I guess it was Spanish Pinzon in a sailing ship crossed this muddy plume, and they put a bucket down and discovered it was fresh, but they were out in what would normally be ocean.
Wow. Have you ever tried your paddles?
No.
You want to?
We could try them.
They look fun.
Yeah. Then I have a vote for trying to paddle to my left. I just don't want them to drift downriver and get away.
No,
And those are all cut out of solid wood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We have
they're remarkably heavy.
All one
Yeah, we
piece.
have to figure out which ones float before we try it out. We also
Was that
have,
picture? Was that picture of Mickey holding 3 different paddles? Was that taken in South America, or are those
oh
paddles that
no,
you guys
that's at
acquired
our
here?
house.
In
Oh, okay.
Boulder.
Did you acquire them here in the U.S. or were they
No,
acquired down in South America?
I acquired them here in the US from my colleague who acquired them all on trips I was on down there.
Oh, okay. Okay, all right. So they're actually from there. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And in Panama, interestingly, all the paddles are hand carved too, and kind of a different grip, different blade, and a lot of they call them cayucos, are hollowed out logs, and they're fun to paddle in.
Yeah.
I think I would feel safer taking a bath in one of those canoes than like just going straight into the water in my Crocs. Like that seems like you guys could make a bathtub, like a floating bathtub.
I don't think anybody's thought about it.
that's a great idea.
Keep yourself like suspended above the electric eels.
Well, where we bathe, I worry more about stingrays because
Okay.
step on one of those and it's really unpleasant, apparently.
And it didn't even look like their tails were really all that long. Like, you know, like you go to Florida and you see the stingrays, you know, the tails are like a foot or 2 long, but the pictures you were showing, they seem to have like little short tails. Is that because
Yeah.
they've been snipped or like, or
No,
that's just long enough to get you?
That's their length.
Okay.
I mean, I think they're dealing with a different bunch of things that step on them in
Okay.
Florida.
Okay.
Well, it definitely looks like an amazing place, and you've been doing some really good work.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It is incredible.
Yeah, you're a wealth of knowledge, Bob.
Yes.
And you've been doing this for what, 45 plus years now?
46 years. Yeah.
46 years. Yeah. So you
So what do they have you doing when you go back down to Panama next week? Is there a specific project you'll be working on?
Oh yeah, it's my own project.
Oh, okay.
That's a project involving studying reforestation, which is one of the things that's proposed as part of adapting to climate change and getting carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
Okay.
But the problem with reforestation is that trees really drink water compared to anything else. So when you plant a tree or a forest, there is 6 inches to 2 feet less runoff from the forest than there was from the landscape before. And this puts reforestation for carbon in total conflict with the global water crisis, which is also a very real problem.
I see.
And so we're researching sort of smart ways to cut a happy medium between reforestation and drought.
And are you working with one of the government agencies doing this, or is this like a project that's funded by Panama or?
It's funded by the Smithsonian.
Oh, okay.
But it's been funded by many things: National Science Foundation, Agency for International Development, U.S. Army. Lots of institutions have funded us.
And what is the organization that is doing this research that you're working with?
Well, it's just my project. It's called the Agua Salud Project.
Oh, okay, so this is something you started.
I started it, yeah.
Oh, I got you. Okay, cool.
It's housed at the Smithsonian,
Okay.
and they are most heavily involved in the fundraising. It's
Okay.
like the Field Museum stuff. Well, this has been both public and private fundraising, but the project has spent over $20 million.
Oh, wow. But it's not something you have to do the fundraising for.
No, thank
You're
goodness.
just doing the science basically,
Right.
and they get the money. Okay, I got you.
Okay,
Okay.
so I'm going down to tend to aspects of it.
Nice.
And then I'm also going down to the little island, Barro Colorado Island, BCI, which has been run by the Smithsonian for decades. And it's a natural preserve as opposed to something to look at reforestation. But I'm a little jaded with Barro Colorado Island in that it's an awesome place, but boy, the Amazon jungle is more awesome. So.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Bob. This was really informative, and you're obviously a wealth of information. So really appreciate your time, and let's everyone just give Bob a good round of applause here.
Woo! Yay, Bob! Thank you, Bob.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Yep, thanks a lot.
Okay,
Really good. Thank you.
okay.
Well, everyone have a
Bye.
good night.
Good to
And
see you all.
yeah, you too.
We'll be back Friday afternoon, we hope.
Have a safe drive back.
Yeah,
Thanks.
be safe out there.
Yeah.
Thank
See you,
you.
Bob. See you, Mickey.
Hey,
Bye.
bye.
Bye,
Bye.
Jim.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Bye,
Bye.
Odds.
I think Oz is gone.